Okay, I'm Kyle, and here at the Kamloops Makerspace, and I'm going to be teaching the Laser 101 course here. So I often teach Laser 101 here at the Makerspace, and we're doing the virtual or online video of it today. Now, if you come look at our machine here, this is the GWECI 100-watt laser cutter. So it uses a big CO2 laser tube. We have that sitting in the back, and it bounces a laser from a back mirror there onto another mirror, and then finally one more mirror in there that goes into the focal lens that focuses it into a tiny beam that allows you to cut materials with high precision. Okay, so this is our laser cutter. Here is our control panel for it. Now, it's fairly standard. A lot of laser cutters, no matter the brand, will have a very similar setup. With ours, it's a simple matter of turning on by turning the key there. Boot up sequence as usual. So, whenever it boots up, the laser then resets the head into the last origin point, which is why it's very important to follow the common shutdown sequence, which I'll get into later. So, with our controls here, we have the startup. These arrows here control where the head goes. This button here is the emergency stop. And then the rest of the buttons are pretty self-explanatory with their labels. Now, if we open up the machine here, we can see we have this beautiful large cutting surface that we can cut on. Now, this here is just called the honeycomb. So, the honeycomb is the laser cutter bed. It is designed so that you can cut on it without worrying about damaging the actual honeycomb itself. So your material gets cut, the honeycomb itself does not. With our laser cutter, you control it with the arrow keys here. Pretty self-explanatory. You move it left, right, down, and up. So that moves it to your desired location. However, you can also move it in the Z-axis. So the Z-axis moves the bed up and down, just like so. Now, in order to do that, I'll show you how to do it on the screen here. So you simply hit the ZU button in the middle, and then you use the left and right buttons. Now, it's a little unintuitive. You would think it'd be up and down, but it's the left and right. So left moves it up, right moves it down. And then when you're done, you just hit the escape button. So you want to use the arrow keys to set your head into the right position. And once you're done with that, you hit the origin button, and that locks the head where you want your origin. Now, you can move the head after that on there, but anytime you hit escape, it will return back to that point. So now we're going to talk about how to focus the laser cutter onto your material, which is very important because when the laser hits the lens, it creates essentially an hourglass shape with the laser beam. And you want to concentrate that beam where it's narrowest at your material. So for that, we have this little fancy focal gauge. There are other focal gauges you can use, but this is generally the one that is most common around the space here. I'll show you how to use it here. So you see here on our laser cutter, our laser is sitting quite a fair bit above the bed right now. Now, in order to do that, you want to use the Z-axis, which I mentioned earlier, and move the bed up and down to the correct size. So you put this here. You want it so that the gauge sits on top of the orange little piece of metal there, and then you want it so that it then meets, or the bottom is resting on that as well. So you set it up, and then focus it about there, and you can see that the bottom of the focal gauge there is on the material, and then the little hook on the top is sitting on top there. So the next point I want to cover is materials. Now, this is a very important topic on what you can and cannot cut with the laser cutter. The main reason why is because many materials, particularly plastics, when cut with the laser cutter, produce toxic chemicals that you do not want to inhale or do not want to be releasing into the atmosphere. As such, we tend to restrict our materials to generally organic materials such as wood or plywood or leather. However, with leather, the one exception is it needs to be veggie tanned. The reason being is that other tanning solutions or tanning methods use chemicals that, when burned, are known to be carcinogenic. We do not want to cause brain tumors here if we can at all help it. Now, the one exception to the plastic rule is acrylic. So acrylic is able to cut on the laser cutter. It smells kind of bad, but that's about the worst of it. It's completely safe to cut on it. Other plastics such as PVC, vinyl, PVC foams, and other more common plastics are generally a bad idea to cut because they will release toxic gases, and often chlorine gas is the main one. So before we do any cutting, there's one last step that we always need to do, and that is to turn on the filtration and ventilation system. So to do that, we go back here into this corner here, and we hit this light switch. As you can hear, it is quite loud, which is why we only run it when the laser is actually running. This is our primary software for the laser cutter. It is called Lightburn. If you look down here, it is this logo right there, so Lightburn. So we do have some other software that does run the laser. They all are pretty much the same as far as user interface and whatnot, and same settings sort of thing. So first thing you want to do is you want to import your file. So for that, you just go to File, Import. So here's our file that we just did in. Here it's these little Mario 1-up mushroom key rings that I made up. So you can see here the little green dot. That represents the origin point that you set earlier. So if you look on the screen, you can see that it is not anywhere close to where the mushrooms are right now. Now that's because there is a little line there that is offsetting it. The origin point always goes to the setting that you have here. So for this, it says job origin, and you see the grid. So in this case, it is in the top right. Therefore, the origin point is in the top right corner of your entire project then. With this program, sometimes when you import things, it has this weird quirk where it groups it all together into one mass, and you can't edit or change anything on it individually. So in order to do that, you have to select, or in order to fix that, you have to select your object, go into the Arrange, and then hit Ungroup. And what that does is that just takes it all out of a group, and you can go and delete things individually. So now that we've all done that, the origin is now closer to what we actually want to cut, and not including that little line that was in the file that shouldn't have been there. So when you are running the laser, there are a few different types of mode that the laser can be in operation when you're using it. Now those are cut, scan, and then there's cut and scan. There are generally a few other modes, but the general ones are variations of cut and scan. So here they are all represented by a separate color. Red being cut, blue being also a cut, but with blue we're going to cut at a shallower depth, so it is equivalent to a line edge. And then the green is going to be scan. So what the green will do is end up scanning just sort of like your printer does, where it does line by line, filling it into a solid fill. Okay, now when you're cutting, you do have to change your settings, namely your speed and power. So for the red, where we want to cut all the way through, we want to change it to power settings of around 45. That is the maximum power that we run on our laser. Any more and we risk wearing out our laser tube too fast. So we always keep the hard limit at 45 power. Now as far as speed, generally the laser can go around to 350 millimeters per second to 400. You can type in a higher number, but it might not actually get to that fast. So, for our case, where we're just going to be cutting 3 millimeter thick Baltic birch plywood, the good speed for that is about 20. So, we'll go and just change the speed settings there from 120 to just 20. And max power to 40. Minimum power can be 45 as well, because we're wanting to cut all the way through. See. None of the other settings really matter at this time when we're talking about just cutting all the way through. So once you got that all happy, you can then go hit OK, and that is saved. Now we want to change the blue layer, so we're going to double click on that here and bring up this. So for blue, we want it to just do a light edge, not cut all the way through. So for that, we want to go to around 40 millimeters per second. Now with this, the speed, of course, you can always change it depending on your project and your preference. 40 I find is a good speed because it maintains a good level of detail and you don't get the laser overshooting as it's going too fast to make the sharp corners. So we don't need this to be going at 45% power because that will cut all the way through or cut far too deep. So for the max power, I would say for this, we just want to do 15. Now for the minimum, I always go 11 because 11 is actually pretty much the lowest power I've found that the laser still actually sends out a beam that does anything to your material. So anything lower than 11 and it won't even make a mark on your material. So once you got all that done, once again, the rest of these settings aren't overly important. You then hit OK, save that. Now comes the scan, which is our green color. Now for this, 350, that's about right. 35, 20, all those settings are going to be pretty good for what we're wanting to do here. Now, for scan, you have a few more settings that you want to be interested in. So the ones that are important are the line interval. So what the line interval does is it changes how much the laser moves between each pass of the scan. So for a high interval, say you do one at 1 millimeter per pass, that means that each time it goes across the material, it's going to move down 1 millimeter and do another pass. The greater the number your scan, the faster it's going to be. However, once you get past a certain point, it becomes very noticeable that it's not so much one solid scan as it is a series of parallel lines that are going down. So, in our first sample, we're going to, let's do that again. In our first example, we're going to go set it to 0.1 millimeters. So that's going to give us a really nice, smooth, and solid scan as it goes down. Now, we also have the scan angle here. So that changes what direction it's scanning. So, if you have it at 0, it's going to go completely horizontal. So, just back and forth, back and forth. If you have it at 90, it's going to go vertically, so up and down. You can do it anywhere in between, although generally you don't really want to do it outside of 90 or 0. So we're going to change this to 0. Set that to go there. Number of passes is 1. That should be good. Scan all shapes at once and scan groups together. Now these are checkboxes that will aid in optimizing and speeding up your project. So, as the description implies, scanning all shapes at once will end up taking all objects that you have scanned and do it all at once. So it just goes across the whole material and turning the laser on and off per object that it's going over. That is very useful when you have many objects that are fairly close together. However, if you are aiming for time efficiency, and you have a project where you have several objects that are spaced further apart, you might want to check that off, because it will be quicker for it to go and scan all of one object and then move over and do the other object, rather than going and trying to travel in between the two to scan them. So that's a good tip if you're trying to stop your projects from taking too long on the laser. Scan groups together is also a similar thing, worth playing around depending on what your project is. So once you got all that done, you hit OK. Our settings seem OK, and importantly, we have all our layers on output, which is what we want for this. Now, if you do not want an object to output, say you have a box that represents the size of your material, say that, then you can put it on a separate layer and just make sure the output is turned off. We're not going to worry about that today, because our material, we're just cutting off some scraps, so it's not going to be an issue. The next segment is the most exciting one. It's actually sending your project to the laser to be cut. So once you are happy with all your settings, what you want to do is you want to select the object that you are going to be cutting. So in this case, it's going to be this Mario keychain. Now, you generally want to have or cut selected graphics turned on, and you can either turn use selected origin or not. The difference is that if you do not use it, it will keep the origin for the whole project. Now, that is very useful if you are doing a big project with several different parts and you want to keep the same origin and you're expecting you might need to do recuts, because by keeping that turned off, your origin will always stay the same point. And that will be the same point that you set at the start of the project. By using user selected origin, what it does is, actually, let's do that again. By using user selected origin, what it does is it will change the origin point from the entire project to just whatever object you have selected. So you can see here where the green dot is switching between the entire project and just the middle piece that we have selected there. And that is just toggle this bar here. So there are two methods to export it. You can either hit just the start and that will send it straight to the machine and start cutting right away. Or if you want to be a little more careful and make sure that it actually is going to cut on the right size of material, you hit the send button. Now what the send button does is it sends it to the machine. Usually you just leave it as light burn or default, and that will save it to the already existing file there. Now we always want to overwrite the file because we do not want to have a lot of files built up in the machine memory. It is fairly limited and it can get full and is unable to accept new files being loaded onto it. So that is why we always overwrite whatever is there. Now that you have the file on the machine, next step is actually to check to make sure that your object is going to fit on the material that you have. Now to do that, you hit the frame button, make sure that your origin is where you want it to be, and then you hit frame, and it will just draw a little square around the border or the range of your actual object. So once you're happy with that, you get to close the laser cutter hatch. Now that is very important because the laser will not run with this lid open. That is a safety feature. It is so that you are not blinded by the laser as it's in operation. So once you have that done, you then turn on your fan and simply hit the start button. And here it is, it's going to be scanning first. So here we see the final product. It is a Mario mushroom. Let's turn that off so we can do that again. So here we see the final product. It is a Mario mushroom. Now, as you can see, it cut quite cleanly through that material. That's the importance of getting your settings dialed in properly, because if you have your power or your speed too low, or too low or too fast, it might not cut all the way through, and you will have to do multiple passes or waste your material, which is never a good thing. So here is our little mushroom. You can see the solid dark bits there. That's where it scanned, so that's where it just did a solid fill, burning a consistent amount through the whole area. Now down below you have the area where it's just a line etched in, and as you can see on the back, those lines did not cut all the way through. So they are just very shallow, enough to show a line, but not enough to actually structurally compromise the material. And then the final cut was the one that went all around, and that cut all the way through. So those are your three main modes that you want to be using. Okay, now that we have cut out what we want to do, it is time to do the shutdown. So you turn off the fan, which we have already done because it is very loud and annoying. And then once you are ready to shut down, it is very important that you move the laser head back into the top right corner. Now once you move it into the top right corner, you want to hit the origin. And that is very important because whenever you turn on the laser cutter, it will always return the head back to the last origin, which if you did not origin it back into the top right corner, could be in the middle of the bed or whoever was using it last where they set it. So that is why we always set it into the top right corner. It is potentially dangerous, especially if the person had set it into the middle and somebody loaded their materials before turning on the machine, and then the laser then goes and runs the head into your material or your weights to hold down the material, which can potentially damage the machine. We do not want that, so that is why we like to emphasize the importance of moving the laser head back into the top right corner, origining it, and then shutting down the laser by just turning off the key. And once you are done that, you can clean up your material, and then you're done for the day, and you can continue on.